Chapter 13. A New Concept of Supply. Supply is one of the easiest demonstrations that a spiritual student can make, but there is a vast difference between the spiritual truth about supply and the human sense of it. In spiritual truth, supply is not income, it is outgo. To human sense, the reverse of that is true. Spiritually, however, there is no way to demonstrate supply. It cannot be done because all the supply that exists in heaven or on earth exists within you at this moment, and, therefore, all attempts to demonstrate supply must result in failure. There is no supply outside of your being. If you want to enjoy the abundance of supply, you must open out a way for that supply to escape. How you can loose this supply by giving will be revealed to you in your communion with God. When someone calls upon you for help in gaining a consciousness of supply and seeks instruction, it is legitimate and necessary to call his attention to the principle of supply in some such fashion as this: certainly, I will give you help, but you can begin to gain this consciousness of supply by trying to find something you can give some place where you have not been giving. Not to your family, because you were probably doing that already, but to someone who is not a member of your family, or even to someone who at the moment is your enemy. Search your clothes closet or your pantry to see if there is not something there that you can spare. Start the flow of giving, and you will start the flow of supply. Your knowing the truth of the infinite and omnipresent nature of supply will set your patient free from the belief of lack and limitation. And as he begins to release the forms of supply and develops an attitude of giving rather than of getting, the supply will begin to flow. There is no limit to what a spiritual student can begin to give away. This giving away has no relationship to amounts, to the number of dollars, or anything else. Giving has to do with the degree of givingness. It is the acknowledgement that supply is giving out, not gathering in. Giving need not necessarily begin with the giving of anything material, money or things, with giving anything. It may begin with the giving up of some things, the giving up of resentment, jealousy, and hate, the giving up of the desire to get recognition, reward, remuneration, gratitude, and cooperation. Simultaneously with this giving up will come the giving of patience, cooperation, love, and forgiveness. Give in the realization that it is not what you get that is your supply, it is what you give. It may be that you have been holding on too tightly to money. If so, you will have to learn how to release it, and by turning it loose, set in motion the flow that inevitably returns to you. This is not to be construed as throwing money or any good thing away prodigally or carelessly. No one is ever called upon for more than meets with common sense or more than wisdom dictates. What is called for is a change in attitude and a willingness to begin at any particular moment to give with the idea that there is this quarter or this dollar to send out into circulation, and the important thing is that it begins to circulate. This is not a new idea. Scripture has given us this teaching under the name of tithing, that is, the giving of 1/10 of one's income to God. There are many people who believe that they cannot afford to give such an amount because in their hearts they believe that that would be too much of a drain on their pocketbooks, and it may be that for them to try to do this might be disastrous at first. It might be wiser for those people to begin tithing a smaller amount, 5%, 4%, 3%, 2%, or any amount, as long as a specific sum or percentage is set aside, which has a priority over all other expenditures, and which is given to some impersonal purpose, not to family, not for one's own benefit, but to something completely impersonal. Probably the majority of people believe that the gift of a tithe should be taken from what is left over after all other expenses have been met. The secret of tithing, however, is not to give the residue, but to give the first fruits to God, and furthermore, to give these first fruits secretly wherever possible, so that only the giver knows whence it comes. After learning how easy it is to give 2 or 3% of one's income, in a short time the amount may be increased to 4 or 5%, and then up to 10%. Interestingly enough, rarely does tithing stop at 10%. I have known 3 different people who tithe 80% of all their income, and surprising as it may seem, these people had more left to live on and with than they could possibly spend, even if they were very extravagant. Let me repeat this important aspect of the principle of supply. Supply is not getting, supply is giving. The bread that you cast upon the waters is the bread that comes back to you. It is not your neighbor's bread, it is your own bread, and if you have not cast it upon the water, there will be no bread to come back to you. All the bread on the water is marked for return to the person who has sent it forth. In one way or another, you must cast bread upon the waters. If you have not learned how to do this, this is your first great lesson. Because of the infinite nature of your being, you cannot add health to yourself, or wealth, or opportunity, or companionship. All you can do is to recognize that you embody all that God is and has. You must not try to get. You must not try to have. You must not try to draw to you. You must learn how to let infinity flow out from you. The coming back of the bread is a reflex action that takes place of its own accord, like throwing a rubber ball against a wall. You throw it, but it bounces back of its own accord. As you cast your bread upon the waters, you will find the grace of God flowing into expression as the harmony of your being. If you ignore this important point in spiritual teaching, or if you think that after all it is not too important, you may very possibly miss the way, because the longer you hold yourself in bondage to the belief that you can get something, even from God, just that long are you separating yourself from contact with your good. The moment you can realize the instantaneity of now and the I-ness of being, from that moment you look out on this world in the joyous recognition, "Thank you, Father, I have no desires. I need nothing but Thy grace. I need no one but Thee. Let me live every single minute as I am living this minute, loving this universe and loving everyone in it. I hold nothing against any man. No one can come within range of my consciousness who needs forgiving, because I have already forgiven him 70 times 7. A second and equally important part of the principle of supply is that supply is invisible. You cannot see, hear, touch, taste, or smell supply. You have never seen supply because supply does not exist in the visible realm. Supply is spirit, or life, completely invisible and infinite in nature. There is today no less supply than Jesus had, than Moses, Elisha, or Elijah had. They knew that they had an infinity, and they proved it. You have exactly the same infinity, not 1 farthing less. But until it becomes clear to you that God constitutes individual being, you cannot understand the infinite nature of your own being, and you will always be seeking supply and security outside of yourself, security in dollar bills, or even in bills of a much larger denomination. The belief that money and property constitute supply has been accepted for so many years that most people rely on them for their security, and then when, through the devaluation of the currency, or through a worldwide depression, or for some other reason beyond their control, billions disappear, they feel that their world has collapsed. Students of spiritual wisdom must come to the realization that they have no supply outside their own being. That supply lies in something that cannot be known through the physical senses. Supply is the infinite invisible. Supply is something within your own being. It is the truth that God constitutes your being. When you recognize God as your being, you will have no other need than to know Him aright. If you have God, you have supply. But the important point is, do you have God? Spiritually, yes. Theoretically, yes. Everyone has God. But if everyone had God, there would be no lack or limitation in all this world. Actually, people merely have God as a potentiality or a possibility. Having God means consciously to know Him aright, consciously to tabernacle with Him, consciously to commune with Him, consciously to know Him as the very I of your being. Having that, you have the source of all supply. Moses had God, and that is why Moses could witness manna falling from the sky when he needed it. Elijah had God, and that is why Elijah, out in the wilderness, could be fed by ravens, or could wake up one morning and find cakes being baked right on the stones in front of him. Out of what? Out of nothing. Out of nothing visible or tangible. These things came to them out of their consciousness of God appearing as the substance and form of life. God appearing as food. Having God, they had all. The world is losing itself in such statements as, God will take care of this, God will do this, or God will do that. And God does not do it at all. It is only in proportion to the God experience that it is done. Everyone must eventually come to the realization that having God, he has all. And not having God, regardless of what else he has nothing. Nothing is withheld. Nothing is missing, and nothing is absent from the person who has achieved God awareness. Yes, yes, you may say to yourself as you read this. Yes, all this sounds good on paper, but how can I arrive at the consciousness of that supply which is continuously eluding me? Let us go back again to our original premise. Since God is infinite, there exists nothing but God. Then there is no supply other than God. When you perceive the infinity of God, and that God in its infinity is closer to you than breathing, you can then begin to claim for yourself an infinite abundance. In making such a claim, you will not be insulting your intelligence, because what you are now claiming is the presence of God in you, the presence of infinite, omnipresent God. It is not easy for anyone to drop completely from his mind all concern as to where his next automobile is coming from, his next vacation trip, or, in some cases, even his next meal. It is not easy to put into practice the Master's teaching to take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. But nevertheless, one of the most important steps in developing a consciousness of supply is to drop these concerns from your mind, because the forms of good are but the added things. In other words, your outward good is but the symbol of the omnipresence of supply. If you do not have a consciousness of supply, you will not have the symbols of supply in your pocket. First, there must be the consciousness of supply, and then the symbols follow. When you have the consciousness of the presence of God wherever you are, when you have the realization that the place whereon you stand is holy ground, and that, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine, when you have that consciousness, the symbols appear as they are needed. The symbols vary from day to day. They take the form of money one day, transportation or hotel accommodations the next day, food, clothing, or some other good the following day. Whatever it may be, it appears as needed, since it is but the symbol or outer expression of supply. Again, let me repeat. Supply itself can never be cognized through the senses. Supply is God. Supply is Spirit. Supply is the presence of the Lord with you. Supply is a life force that works through you. What further proof does the spiritually receptive person need of the truth of this than to visualize a fruit tree in the off-season when there is no fruit, and when there are not even blossoms on the tree? Because the tree is barren, are you going to cut it down? Why not? There is no supply there, no visible supply. To all appearances, the tree is barren. Ah, but you know better than that. You know that there is a life force operating in and through that tree, a life force that is forming the sap which will go up through the trunk, out into the branches, and which will later appear as the blossoms, and then later as the fruit. You are not misled by the appearance of a barren tree into believing that the tree has no supply of fruit, or that the tree is useless. Why not apply this same principle to your own life and affairs, and trust it regardless of the state of your visible supply at any given moment? If a hurricane should come and blow your whole world away, you would still be standing on holy ground, that earth which is the Lord's in the fullness thereof, because I am there. And that invisible, infinite, and all-loving life force would still be operating in your consciousness. With a little patience, the blossoms and the fruit will appear again in the form of dollar bills or whatever the need may be. All that is necessary is a recognition of this truth. Believe this or not as you choose. There is a life force operating in you, just as it is operating in the tree. But you ask, why has it not become visible in greater measure? Why must I struggle endlessly with this problem of lack? Can it be because your consciousness is not attuned to the invisible, but only to the visible? Can it be that most of the time you have been trying and still are trying to create supply from the visible? Loaves and fishes cannot be multiplied from anything in the visible, nor can dollar bills. If anyone attempted to multiply dollar bills, he would very quickly find himself in jail. Therefore, if anyone wants more dollar bills, he must do his multiplying in the invisible. And the manner of it? Realize that God is infinite, and that your supply is as infinite as God. And what about those who let their fruit stay on the tree, who do not pluck it? How quickly they learn that a tree can wither and give forth no more fruit. Only as you pluck the fruit and gather the blossoms from the flower bushes does the life force begin its work of multiplication, pushing out twice as much as before. Your supply becomes evident only in the proportion that you love your neighbor. Give out love, give out forgiveness, give out cooperation, but give always without seeking a return. Only the gross materialist gives and then seeks a return. The true spiritual light gives out of the fullness of a heart of givingness, seeking no return. There is no need for any kind of return. God is one sufficient return. To understand this is to understand one of the major healing principles of the infinite way. Your consciousness of truth determines your supply. Not a God somewhere, not a Christ somewhere, not a spirit somewhere, but your consciousness, your developed state of consciousness. Very few in all the world are born with the consciousness of truth full blown. Nearly always it is a matter of developing that consciousness. The consciousness of the fishermen disciples was a developed state of consciousness. The consciousness of Saul of Tarsus developed into the consciousness of St. Paul. St. Augustine in early life was far from being a spiritual light, but he also became a developed state of spiritual consciousness. The secret is that the source of your supply is your own consciousness of God as supply, your developed state of consciousness. If you seek supply through the help of a practitioner, then your supply is dependent on the developed spiritual consciousness of your practitioner. But that will not be a permanent demonstration of supply, because sooner or later you will be placed in a position where you will have to rely on your own developed state of consciousness, always remembering that that developed consciousness is God consciousness, unfolding as your individual consciousness. It is then that you begin to drop in a measure the personal sense of supply and arrive at a great and grand moment in your life when the whole world falls off your shoulders, when you say and believe with all your heart, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Son, all that I have is thine." The fullness of God's glory, not just a part of it, but the fullness is now mine, swallowing up mortality with its limited sense of life, and clothing me with immortality, swallowing up my finite sense of self, that I may be clothed upon with God's infinity, God's grace, God's presence, and God's power. I have no power of my own. I of my own self can do nothing. I of my own self am nothing. If I speak of myself and my power and my supply, I bear witness to a lie. The Father is my life. The Father is my supply. I am invisible. My supply is invisible, and I carry it with me wherever I go. Some spiritual seekers mistakenly entertain the fantastic idea that in some mysterious manner God is much better to them than to the rest of the world. What a horrible God that would be! True, and ignorance of truth may bring your neighbor face to face with insufficiency and leave him under a claim of lack or limitation. But God does not bestow his bounties more freely upon one than upon another. The only difference is that some, and particularly some on the path, are more consciously aware of God's presence manifest as form. No seeker dare believe that one nation, one race, or one religion has more access to God than another, or that any one person has some special status with God. The infinity of God is universal, but it is your apprehension of that truth that constitutes your demonstration of good. When you comprehend that a realization of God's presence results in the actual manifestation and expression of abundance, you will not believe that through some miraculous treatment or prayer anything has been increased. You will understand that what has happened is that you have become more aware of that which already existed from the beginning in its fullness. In the very city where one person experiences lack and limitation, another is enjoying abundance. The city is not responsible, nor is the time responsible. It may be a year of depression or one of prosperity. The year is not responsible. Many people have lost all their possessions in boom years. The place cannot make you, and the place cannot break you. The time cannot make you, and the time cannot break you. You yourself become a law to your experience in proportion as you realize God to be the substance of all form. If God is the substance of all form, can you increase the amount of the form? Is God the substance of limited form? No, the form is already infinite as the substance of which it is made. The secret lies in the acknowledgement of God as omnipresent. More than that, as omnipresence itself, the presence of your very being, and therefore the presence of infinity. Your awareness of the presence of infinity reveals infinity where the lack has been. Everything that appears is made out of the substance of the invisible, and it is infinite. For example, there is no way to increase your supply of crops, money, land, or of anything else by what the world calls prayer. There is no miracle of prayer that produces rabbits out of hats. Nobody can do that unless the rabbits were there in the first place. There is no such thing as increase or decrease. There is only infinity expressing itself. If you are not the recipient of the bounty of infinity, it is not because infinity is absent. It is because of your lack of awareness of infinity. Too many metaphysicians are trying to demonstrate forms of good, while all the time there is no form of good separate and apart from good itself. In proportion as the consciousness of God is demonstrated, that presence of good appears in the form necessary to your experience of the moment, sometimes in the most miraculous ways. Throughout the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, this miracle is told and retold. Every prophet, saint, seer, or sage has had an awareness of God's presence, has lived consciously in that presence, and has found His protection, food, safety, and security appearing as whatever was his need. But was everybody in biblical times thus cared for? Is everybody today thus cared for? You know the answer. Then to whom did it happen? To whom does it happen? And to whom will it happen? To the person consciously aware of God's presence, the person living, moving, and having his being consciously in God. The Master could not multiply loaves and fishes. The Master had only one realization, the presence of the Father within, and his consciousness of the presence of the Father within appeared outwardly as the multiplication of fishes, as healings, and as the raising of the dead. As you learn to give up using mental power, striving to accomplish something with truth, or attempting to make a powerhouse out of the human mind, and become still and receptive until the word begins to flow, you will know the meaning of harmony and of infinity. Watch the miracle as your mind gives up the struggle to create, to increase, to heal, to save, or to redeem. Watch the miracle that takes place in your life as you learn to relax in the realization that the infinite nature of God makes God the only is, and that even the forms as which God appears must be infinite. So the heavens declare the glory of God by showing forth the infinite beauty and bounty of God. The earth shows forth the handiwork of God, the glory of God in infinite form, variety, color, perfume, and amount. Infinity is the measure of God. The moment, however, that you try to demonstrate apples, you have descended to finiteness. The minute you try to demonstrate a home, health, or wealth, you are in finiteness. But if you demonstrate the realization of God's presence, you have God's presence appearing as infinity in infinite forms of good. The presence of God does not manufacture some form of harmony. The presence of God is itself the form of all good.